When a 7-month pregnant waitress serves coffee to the wrong customer at 2 a.m., she doesn't just recognize his face, she recognizes the father of her unborn child. The same man she's been hiding from for months. The same man who rules the city's underworld with an iron fist. Marco Valenti doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. Now, with nowhere left to run and a baby about to arrive, Elena Brooks must face the one truth she's been avoiding. Some men don't let go. Ever. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey has traveled. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner buzzed like dying insects, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked vinyl booths and chipped formica counters. Elena Brooks moved between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to become invisible, her swollen belly preceding her like a shield she wished could actually protect her from anything that mattered. 2:17 in the morning, the loneliest hour in a city that never truly slept, when only insomniacs, shift workers, and people running from something found themselves seeking refuge in places like this. Elena had become all three. Her lower back throbbed with each step, a constant reminder that 7 months pregnant and working double shifts was slowly destroying her body. But rent didn't pay itself, and the cramped studio apartment in the worst part of town, the place where she'd finally felt safe enough to stop moving, required cash she barely had. "Coffee, hun?" she asked the truck driver in booth 3, her voice carrying the practiced cheerfulness of someone who had learned to smile through exhaustion. He nodded without looking up from his phone, and Elena moved toward the coffee station, her reflection catching in the darkened window. She barely recognized herself anymore. The woman staring back had hollowed cheeks and shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Her dark hair, once glossy and carefully styled, now hung in a messy ponytail. The cheap maternity uniform hung on her frame everywhere except the pronounced curve of her stomach. 7 months ago, she'd been someone different. Someone who wore designer dresses and had her nails done every week. Someone who attended gallery openings and charity galas on the arm of a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. 7 months ago, she'd been Marco Valenti's woman. The thought sent ice through her veins, and her hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee into a chipped mug. She'd gotten good at not thinking about him, at pushing away memories of strong hands and dangerous smiles, at ignoring the ache in her chest that had nothing to do with pregnancy. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed, and Elena didn't look up. Late-night customers came and went in a steady stream of humanity's forgotten hours. She'd learned not to make eye contact, not to engage beyond professional necessity. Invisible. Safe. "Sit anywhere you like," Rosie called from behind the counter, her gravelly smoker's voice cutting through the low murmur of the half-dozen customers scattered throughout the diner. Elena grabbed the coffee pot and headed toward booth 3, focused on the simple task ahead. Pour coffee. Smile. Move on. The rhythm that had kept her sane for months. She was 3 steps from the booth when she felt it, that electric charge in the air that preceded storms and disasters. The kind of presence that made her skin prickle and her heart rate spike before her conscious mind could process why. Her feet stopped moving. She knew, even before she looked up, even before she saw him. Some part of her had always known this moment would come, that running only delayed the inevitable. Marco Valenti sat in booth 7, the corner booth she'd deliberately avoided because it offered a clear view of the entire diner and both exits. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was styled back from a face that belonged on Renaissance sculptures, all sharp angles and dangerous beauty. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, intense, and locked directly on her with an expression that made her blood run cold and hot simultaneously. He'd found her. The coffee pot slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor in an explosion of glass and hot liquid. The sound shattered the diner's quiet murmur, every head turning toward the commotion. Elena barely noticed. She couldn't look away from Marco, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 7 months of carefully constructed distance evaporated in a single moment. He rose from the booth with the fluid grace of a predator, his eyes never leaving her face as he crossed the diner in long, purposeful strides. The other customers instinctively moved out of his way, responding to the aura of power and danger that surrounded him like a second skin. Elena. Her name on his lips was a benediction and a curse, spoken in that deep, accented voice that used to whisper against her skin in the dark. I... Her voice failed. She took a step back, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, and watched his gaze follow the movement. Marco's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. His gaze locked on her pregnant stomach, and she watched something dangerous flash across his face, shock, calculation, and then a possessive fury that made her want to run. "You need to leave," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leave?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Elena, Cara, I don't think you understand the situation. Don't call me that." The old endearment stung worse than any insult could. "Just go, Marco, please." "Is it mine?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp as a blade. Around them, the diner had gone completely silent, every customer and worker frozen in place like they'd stumbled into a private drama too dangerous to interrupt. Elena lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with all the defiance she could muster. "That's none of your business." "Like hell it isn't." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, familiar, devastating. "How far along?" "Marco, how far along?" 7 months, she heard herself say, and watched his jaw clench. She'd disappeared 8 months ago, slipping away in the middle of the night with nothing but a hastily packed bag and enough cash to get her out of the city. She'd made it as far as 3 hours away before her nerve broke, and she'd settled into this nowhere town, taking a new name and a job that asked no questions. She'd thought she was safe. 7 months, Marco repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "You've been carrying my child for 7 months, and you didn't think I deserved to know? It's not... Don't." He held up a hand, his control visibly fraying. "Don't you dare lie to me, Elena. We both know there's been no one else." Heat flooded her cheeks because he was right, and they both knew it. There had only ever been Marco. Intense, overwhelming, all-consuming Marco who had swept into her ordinary life like a hurricane and changed everything. "Hey, buddy, I think the lady asked you to leave." The truck driver from booth 3 had risen, his linebacker shoulders squared in misplaced heroism. Marco didn't even glance at him. "Sit. Down." 2 words spoken without heat or volume, but carrying such absolute authority that the truck driver actually took a step back. One of Marco's men, because of course he hadn't come alone, materialized from somewhere near the entrance, his presence a silent warning. "This is a private conversation," Marco said, still focused entirely on Elena. "Everyone else can leave." "This is my job," Elena protested. "You can't just watch me." He pulled out his wallet, extracted several $100 bills, and laid them on the nearest table without counting. "For the disruption." Rosie, wise enough to recognize real danger when she saw it, started ushering customers toward the door. "Come on, folks. Free coffee tomorrow. Shop's closing early." "Rosie, you can't," Elena started. "Honey," the older woman cut her off, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been around long enough to know when to mind my own business. Whatever this is, you two need to work it out." She squeezed Elena's shoulder as she passed. "You'll be okay." Then they were alone, Elena and Marco and the bodyguard by the door, who might as well have been furniture for all the attention Marco paid him. "You ran from me," Marco said, his voice low and dangerous. "You disappeared in the middle of the night without a word, without a trace. Do you have any idea what I thought? What I did to find you?" "I had to leave." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. "Your life, Marco. The things you do. I couldn't raise a child in that world." "So you decided to raise my child here?" He gestured at the rundown diner with barely contained disgust. "Working yourself to death in some nowhere town, alone and pregnant? That's better? At least it's safe." "Safe?" He laughed again, that bitter sound that made her flinch. "Elena, you're 7 months pregnant and working double shifts in a diner that probably hasn't passed a health inspection in a decade. You're living in a neighborhood where gunshots are background noise. You call that safe?" "Safer than being with you." The words landed like a physical blow. She watched pain flash across his face before his expression hardened into something cold and unyielding. "I never hurt you," he said quietly. "In all the time we were together, I never laid a hand on you in anger." No, she agreed, her voice breaking. But your world did. The threats, the violence always lurking just beneath the surface, the constant fear that one day someone would use me to get to you. I couldn't live like that, Marco, and I definitely couldn't bring a baby into it. So you chose this instead. He moved closer, crowding into her space in a way that made her pulse race. You chose poverty and loneliness over letting me provide for you, over letting me protect you. I chose freedom, Elena said, even as her treacherous body responded to his nearness. I chose a life where I don't wake up every morning wondering if today's the day everything falls apart. And how's that working out for you, Kara? His hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the steel in his voice. You look exhausted. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep? A decent meal? She wanted to pull away, to deny the truth in his words, but her body betrayed her by leaning into his touch. 7 months of surviving alone, of carrying this pregnancy without support, of lying awake at night wondering if she'd made the right choice. It all crashed over her at once. I'm managing, she whispered. You're dying by inches. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she realized with horror that tears were sliding down her face. Look at you, Elena. Really look. You're running yourself into the ground. Better than the alternative. Is it? His other hand moved to her belly, and she gasped at the contact. Is this really better for our child? A mother who's exhausted and terrified, struggling just to survive? Don't, her voice cracked. Don't you dare use our baby against me. I'm not using anyone. I'm stating facts. His hand spread wide across her stomach, possessive and protective. You're carrying my child, Elena, my son or daughter, and you think I'm going to just walk away? Let you keep struggling alone? I don't need your help. A need and deserve are different things. Marco's jaw clenched. You shouldn't have to do this alone, and I shouldn't have to miss out on my child's life because you're too stubborn to accept the truth. What truth? She forced herself to meet his eyes. That you're a criminal? That people die because of decisions you make? That our child would grow up in a world where violence is just business as usual? The truth, he said quietly, is that I loved you, that I still love you, and that I would burn down the entire city before I'd let anything happen to you or our baby. The confession hung between them, raw and honest in a way Marco rarely allowed himself to be. Elena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Love isn't enough, she whispered. Not when the price is too high. Then what is enough? He searched her face, genuine confusion in his eyes. What do I have to do, Elena? What do I have to be? Someone different. The words hurt to say. Someone who doesn't have blood on his hands. She watched him absorb that, saw something shift behind his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might actually walk away, might finally accept that they were impossible. Then his expression hardened into something implacable. No, he said simply. No. No, I won't walk away. No, I won't pretend this baby doesn't exist. And no, I won't let you keep running. His hands framed her face, forcing her to hold his gaze. You want someone different? Fine. I'll change what I can change, but I won't change being this child's father. I won't change wanting you safe and provided for. And I sure as hell won't change the fact that you're mine, Elena. You always have been. I'm not a possession. No, you're the woman I love who's carrying my child. The woman who's been suffering alone for months because she's too scared to trust me. He pressed his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I know what I am, Kara. I know what I do, but I also know that I would never ever let anything happen to you or our baby. You're the only thing in this world that matters more than the business. The only thing worth changing for. Elena wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to surrender to the safety he offered, to stop fighting this exhausting battle alone. But she'd left for a reason, and that reason hadn't changed. I can't go back to that life, she said, her voice barely audible. Then we'll build a new one. His certainty was absolute. Whatever you need, Elena. Whatever makes you feel safe. We'll figure it out together. You make it sound so simple. Because it is simple. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I want to take care of you and our child. You need someone to help carry this burden. Those two things don't have to be complicated. Everything about us is complicated. Maybe. A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. But we were good together once. We can be again. The baby kicked, a strong flutter against Marco's palm that made them both freeze. Elena watched wonder cross his face, saw the hard edges of the crime boss soften into something almost vulnerable. Was that? Yeah. She couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. The baby's been active tonight. Active, Marco repeated, his hand moving gently across her belly, as if trying to feel another kick. How long has this been happening? A few weeks. Gets stronger every day. And you've been experiencing this alone. It wasn't a question, and the pain in his voice made her chest ache. Every milestone, every moment, you kept it all from me. I was trying to protect. I know. He cut her off gently. I know why you did it, Kara. I understand the fear. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less. The baby kicked again, and Marco's expression transformed into something she'd never seen before. Pure, unguarded joy mixed with a protectiveness that was almost frightening in its intensity. I've missed so much already, he said quietly. Don't make me miss any more. Elena felt her resolve crumbling. 7 months of running, of struggling, of lying awake at night wondering if she'd made the right choice. It had all led back to this moment. Standing in a rundown diner at 2 a.m, Marco's hand on her belly and his heart in his eyes, she realized that maybe some things were inevitable. Maybe some men really didn't let go. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, tears streaming freely now. I don't know if I'm strong enough to be in your world again. Then lean on me. Marco pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and she let him. Let me be strong enough for both of us until you find your footing again. She should pull away, should maintain the distance she'd worked so hard to create, but she was so tired of being strong, so exhausted from carrying everything alone. Just for tonight, she heard herself say against his chest. We'll figure out the rest later. For tonight, Marco agreed, but they both knew it was a lie. He wasn't the kind of man who settled for temporary solutions, and she wasn't strong enough to keep running. Not anymore. Not when every cell in her body recognized coming home. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other while the night pressed against the diner's windows. Outside, the city continued its restless turning, indifferent to the collision of two lives that had tried and failed to remain separate. Finally, Marco pulled back enough to look at her face. You're exhausted. When's your shift end? 6. His expression darkened. You were going to work until 6? In your condition? I need the money. Not anymore. The authority in his voice was absolute. You're done, Elena. Done with this diner. Done with the double shifts. Done with struggling. You can't just watch me. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then pocketed it again. Car's coming. We're leaving. My apartment? We'll send someone for your things tomorrow. He guided her toward the door with gentle but implacable pressure. Tonight, you're coming home with me. Marco, I can't just abandon my job. Rosie will understand. He glanced at the bodyguard by the door. Tony, make sure the owner is compensated for any inconvenience, generously. Tony nodded, already moving to handle the task, and Elena realized with a mixture of frustration and relief that arguing was pointless. Marco had made his decision, and Marco's decisions were as immovable as mountains. This is kidnapping, she said without heat as he led her outside. This is me taking care of what's mine. He helped her into the back of a sleek black car that had appeared as if summoned. You can hate me for it tomorrow. Tonight, you're going to sleep in a real bed and wake up to breakfast that doesn't come from a diner kitchen. Elena wanted to protest, to assert her independence, to remind him that she'd managed just fine without him. But the leather seat was incredibly comfortable, and the car was warm, and Marco's arm around her shoulders felt like safety itself. This doesn't mean I'm staying, she murmured, already feeling exhaustion pulling her under. Of course not, Kara. His lips brushed her forehead. Just rest now. We'll fight about it in the morning. She meant to argue, meant to maintain her resistance, but her eyes were already closing. The baby kicked gently, as if settling in for the ride, And for the first time in 7 months, Elena let herself relax completely. She didn't see the look Marco exchanged with Tony in the rearview mirror, a look of grim determination mixed with relief. Didn't hear the quiet phone calls he made as she drifted off, already setting plans in motion to ensure she'd never have to go back to that cramped apartment or that exhausting job. She'd run from him once, and it had nearly destroyed them both. Marco wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. He'd found her, found them, and he'd move heaven and earth before he let her slip away again. The car slid through the night-dark streets, carrying them toward a future neither had planned, but both had been hurtling toward since the moment Elena had looked up and seen her past standing in the present. Some collisions were inevitable, some fates inescapable, and some loves, no matter how far you ran, always brought you back home. As the diner disappeared in the rearview mirror, the lights flickering like dying stars, Elena's hand found Marco's in sleep, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture of trust her conscious mind still couldn't quite accept. But Marco felt it, that small surrender, and held on like a man who'd been granted a second chance he didn't deserve but would fight to keep anyway. The night swallowed them whole, and somewhere in the dark, their future, complicated, dangerous, impossible, and inevitable, waited to begin. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of natural light she hadn't seen in months. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft, the sheets too smooth, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back. Marco. The diner. The car ride through the dark. She sat up too quickly, her pregnant belly throwing off her balance, and had to grip the edge of the mattress to steady herself. The bedroom was enormous, decorated in shades of cream and gold that screamed money. Not just wealth, the kind of obscene fortune that made dropping hundreds of dollars at a diner feel like loose change. Marco's penthouse. She was in Marco's penthouse. Panic fluttered in her chest as she looked down at herself. Someone had changed her out of her stained uniform and into soft cotton pajamas she didn't recognize. Her first instinct was outrage, but the clothes fit perfectly around her belly, and she was too grateful to be out of that polyester disaster to work up real anger. The door opened without warning, and Elena's heart jumped into her throat. But it wasn't Marco. It was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, carrying a tray that smelled like heaven. "Good, you're awake," the woman said with a warm smile. "Mr. Valenti said to let you sleep as long as you needed, but I thought you might be hungry when you woke up." "Who are you?" Elena's voice came out rougher than intended. "Maria. I manage the household." She set the tray on the bedside table. Fresh fruit, perfectly scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. Real food, not the greasy diner leftovers Elena had been living on. "How are you feeling?" "Confused. Trapped. Like I've made a terrible mistake." Maria's smile didn't falter. "All normal reactions to waking up in Marco Valenti's bed, I imagine. Though you're the first woman who's ever made it this far, so I'm just guessing." Elena blinked. "What?" "In the 5 years I've worked here, Mr. Valenti has never brought a woman to the penthouse. Never." Maria busied herself adjusting the curtains, her tone deliberately casual. "He keeps this space private, sacred, almost. So whatever you are to him, it's not casual. I'm the idiot who got pregnant and thought she could run away. You're the woman carrying his child," Maria corrected gently, "and the woman he's been searching for like a man possessed for the past 7 months. Trust me, dear, I've never seen him like this. Not about anything or anyone." Before Elena could respond, another door opened, one she hadn't noticed, partially hidden in the wall paneling. Marco emerged from what must have been an ensuite bathroom, his hair damp and his shirt unbuttoned, and every coherent thought fled Elena's mind. 7 months hadn't diminished her body's response to him. If anything, pregnancy had made her more aware of him, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his muscles moved under his skin, the dangerous grace in every movement. "You're awake," he said, and his voice did things to her that should have been illegal. "Good, we have a lot to discuss." "I need to leave," Elena said, trying for firm and landing somewhere near desperate. "This was a mistake. I shouldn't have—" "Eat first," Marco nodded to the tray. "Then we'll talk." "I'm not hungry." As if to contradict her, her stomach growled audibly. Marco's lips twitched, and Maria made a discreet exit, closing the door behind her with a soft click. "Liar," Marco said, but there was affection in it. "Eat, Elena. For the baby, if not for yourself." And because she was hungry, starving, actually, in a way that went beyond simple appetite, she picked up the fork and took a bite of eggs. They were perfect, seasoned just right, and she had to suppress a moan of pleasure. Marco watched her eat with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He moved to the chair beside the bed, close enough to touch, but giving her space. And she was grateful and frustrated in equal measure. "We need to talk about logistics," he said when she'd made a significant dent in the food. "Logistics," Elena repeated flatly. "Is that what you call kidnapping now?" "I call it ensuring the mother of my child isn't working herself to death in a diner at 2 a.m. His jaw tightened. "You want to call that kidnapping? Fine. I'll accept the label if it means you're safe." Safe is relative when you're a crime boss, Marco. Former crime boss. The words dropped like stones into still water. Elena's fork clattered against the plate. "What?" "I'm restructuring." He leaned back in the chair, his posture deceptively relaxed. "The legitimate businesses stay. Real estate, restaurants, the security firm. Everything else gets handed off to people who can handle the heat." "You're lying." "I don't lie to you." His eyes held hers, utterly serious. "I never have." That was true, she realized with a jolt. Marco might have hidden things, might have operated in moral gray areas that made her uncomfortable, but he'd never outright lied to her. Not about his business, not about his feelings, not about anything that mattered. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you were right." The admission seemed to cost him something. "That night you left, the night I came home and found you gone, I realized what I'd lost. And I've spent 7 months thinking about what I need to change to get you back. You can't just stop being who you are because I asked you to." "No," he agreed. "But I can choose to be a better version of myself. A version that can be a father, a version you don't have to run from." Elena's throat tightened. "It's not that simple, Marco. You have enemies, people who would use our baby against you." "Had enemies." His correction was deliberate. "Most of them are neutralized or in prison. The ones who remain understand that Marco Valenti is off the playing field. My successor can deal with them." "Successor?" "Dante. He's been my second for years, smart, ruthless when he needs to be, and ambitious enough to want the throne." Marco's expression was unreadable. "He'll handle the transition. I'll keep oversight of the legitimate operations and enough connections to ensure nobody tries anything stupid. But the violent side of things, that's done." "You make it sound easy." "It's not. It's going to be complicated and dangerous, and probably the stupidest business decision I've ever made." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But I'm doing it anyway, because the alternative is losing you and our child, and that's not acceptable." Elena set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "You can't put that on me. I can't be responsible for you changing your entire life." "You're not responsible. I'm choosing this." His hand reached out, settling over hers. "You think I haven't been looking for an exit strategy? I've been in this life since I was 16 years old, Elena. I'm 34 now. I'm tired. Tired of the violence, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of being the man everyone fears." "Then why didn't you leave before?" "Because I didn't have a reason to." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Then I met you, and suddenly I had something worth protecting, something worth changing for. But I was too proud to admit it, too stubborn to see that I was driving you away with my inability to change. And now? Now I've had 7 months to imagine a life without you, without our child." His voice roughened. 7 months of searching, of bribing and threatening and calling in every favor I had, trying to find you. 7 months of wondering if you were safe, if the baby was healthy, if you hated me enough to never come back. "I don't hate you," Elena said quietly. "I never did. Then why did you run?" The question hung between them, honest and raw. Elena pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around her belly in an unconscious gesture of protection. "Because I was terrified," she admitted. "Because I grew up in a normal family with normal problems, and suddenly I was in love with a man who kept a gun under his pillow and had meetings that ended with people disappearing. Because I got pregnant and realized I had to choose between you and safety, and I chose safety. Was it safe? Marco's voice was gentle but insistent. That apartment in the bad neighborhood? That diner where anything could happen? Working yourself into exhaustion with no one to help you? It was safer than being a target. You're a target anyway, Kara. The moment you became mine, you became a piece on the board. Running just meant you were a piece without protection. Elena felt cold despite the warm morning sun. What are you saying? I'm saying that the people who wanted to use you against me didn't stop wanting that just because you disappeared. They just had to work harder to find you. He pulled out his phone, brought up a photo, and turned it toward her. Recognize him? The image showed a man in his 40s, unremarkable except for cold eyes, and a scar running down his left cheek. Elena shook her head. Dmitry Volkov. Works for the Bratva, Russian organized crime. He was asking questions about you in that town 3 weeks ago. Marco swiped to another photo. This is Chen Wu, Triad Enforcer. He was spotted near your diner 2 weeks ago. Elena's stomach dropped. You're lying. You have to be lying. I wish I was. He pocketed the phone. You think I found you by accident last night? I've had people watching you for the past month, making sure nobody else got too close. That diner visit wasn't chance, Elena. It was me making sure you stayed safe while I figured out the best way to approach you. You've been watching me for a month? Anger warred with fear in her chest. And you didn't think to tell me I was in danger? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was making it up to scare you into coming back? His expression was grim. I needed proof that I could keep you safe first. Needed to have enough pieces in place that bringing you back wouldn't just paint a bigger target on your back. And do you have those pieces in place? Yes. The certainty in his voice was absolute. The penthouse is a fortress. Security on every floor, cameras on every entrance, people I trust with my life standing between you and anyone who might try something. You're safer here than you've been in months. Elena wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because as much as she hated admitting it, Marco was right. She'd been so focused on getting away from him that she hadn't considered whether she was actually safe or just alone. This is insane, she whispered. All of this. Your life. My life. Everything. Agreed. A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. But we're in it together now. Might as well make the best of it. You're assuming I'm staying. I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to prove I can be what you need. He stood, moving to the windows that overlooked the city. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, or even to share my bed. I'm asking you to stay here, where you're safe, and let me take care of you and our baby. That's all. That's not all, and you know it. Elena pushed herself up from the bed, her movements awkward with pregnancy weight. You want me back. You want the life we had before. I want you alive and healthy and in my life. Marco turned to face her. Everything else is negotiable. How very generous of you. I'm being serious, Elena. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that made her heart ache. I know I can't force you to love me again. I know trust has to be earned. But I can give you safety and comfort and the space to figure out what you want. Can't you at least let me do that? She should say no, should maintain her independence and her distance. But her back ached and her feet throbbed, and the baby was pressing on her bladder, and the thought of going back to that cramped apartment and that exhausting job made her want to cry. Temporary, she heard herself say. Just until after the baby is born, and I can figure out what's next. Marco's expression didn't change, but she saw something shift in his eyes, relief and triumph, and a determination that made her nervous. Temporary, he agreed, though they both knew it was another lie. Because Marco Valenti didn't do temporary, and Elena Brooks was too tired to keep fighting. They were caught in each other's gravity, pulled by forces stronger than logic or fear, and pretending otherwise was just delaying the inevitable. I want my own room, Elena said, trying to set boundaries even as they crumbled around her. You have one. This one. Marco's smile was dangerous. I'll take the guest suite down the hall. And I want to see a doctor. My own doctor, not someone you've paid off. Dr. Sarah Chen, 2 blocks from here. Best OB/GYN in the city. Completely independent and expecting your call. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. I made an appointment for tomorrow, but you can change it if you want. Elena stared at the card, then at Marco. You had this all planned out. I've had 7 months to plan, Kara. I wasn't going to waste the opportunity when I finally found you. This is insane, she repeated, but there was less heat in it now. Welcome to my world. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, careful and chaste. Now finish your breakfast. Maria's feelings will be hurt if you don't, and she's the only person in this building I'm actually afraid of. Despite herself, Elena laughed. The sound surprised them both, breaking some of the tension that had been coiling tighter and tighter. There she is, Marco murmured, and the warmth in his voice made her chest ache. I've missed that laugh. Don't get used to it. But she was smiling as she said it, and they both knew the battle was already lost. The days that followed developed a strange rhythm. Marco left early for meetings, returning in the evenings with takeout from restaurants Elena had only ever dreamed of affording. They ate dinner together, conversation carefully neutral, discussing the baby's movements, potential names, nursery colors. Dr. Chen confirmed what Elena already knew. She was healthy but exhausted, the baby measuring perfectly but her own body showing signs of stress from months of overwork. The doctor prescribed rest, better nutrition, and reduced stress, all of which Marco took as personal directives. Elena found herself sleeping in every morning, waking to breakfast delivered by Maria and gentle sunlight. She read, watched movies on a screen the size of her old apartment's wall, and tried not to think too hard about how quickly she was adjusting to this life. The baby grew more active as stress decreased and nutrition improved. Elena would sit by the windows, her hands on her belly, feeling the kicks and rolls and wondering what kind of person this child would become. Would they have Marco's intensity, her cautious nature, some combination that would drive them both crazy? Marco worked from home more often, his office door always open in silent invitation. Sometimes Elena would wander in, drawn by curiosity or boredom or the simple need for company. He'd look up from his laptop, those dark eyes warming, and make space for her on the leather couch. Tell me something I don't know about you, she said one afternoon, curled up with her feet tucked under her growing belly. Marco considered the request seriously. I wanted to be a chef when I was young, before my father died and I had to take over the family business. A chef? Elena couldn't quite picture it. Really? Really. I used to cook with my grandmother every Sunday. She taught me that food was love made tangible. A rare softness crossed his features. I still cook sometimes when I need to think. I've never seen you cook. Because I never brought you here. He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. This space was mine, separate from everything else. I kept you in that other world, the restaurants and the hotels and the public spaces, because I was trying to protect you from the reality of what I did. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? Marco's smile was sad. If you never saw the real me, never got too deep into my world, maybe you wouldn't realize how dangerous it was. Maybe you'd stay. But I left anyway. You left because I was a coward. The admission was quiet but absolute. I should have shown you this side from the beginning, should have trusted you with all of it, not just the palatable parts. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't have felt the need to run. Elena absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. What would you have cooked for me if you'd brought me here? Osobuco, my grandmother's recipe, the one I've never made for anyone else. His eyes held hers. Rich and slow-cooked and worth the wait, like some things in life. The weight of the metaphor hung between them, and Elena felt her carefully maintained distance cracking just a little bit more. Maybe you could make it sometime, she heard herself say, before the baby comes. Marco's smile could have lit the entire city. I'd like that. They were finding their way back to each other, Elena realized. Not in the passionate, desperate way they'd collided the first time, but slowly, carefully, like two people learning a new dance. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The nightmares started in her second week at the penthouse. Elena would wake gasping, her heart racing from dreams of faceless men and her baby disappearing into darkness. Marco would appear within seconds, kneeling beside her bed with careful hands and a worried expression. Just dreams, she'd gasp, but they both knew it was more than that. Come here. He'd pull her into his arms, his heartbeat steady against her ear. You're safe. I promise you're safe. And Elena, too shaken to maintain her distance, would let him hold her until the terror subsided and sleep reclaimed her. She never asked how he knew when she woke, never questioned the speed of his response. Some things were better left unexamined. On her third week, Marco came home early with a familiar determination in his expression. We need to talk about security protocols, he said over dinner, homemade pasta that he'd actually cooked, fulfilling his promise. Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What kind of protocols? The kind that keep you and the baby safe. He pulled out a tablet, brought up a series of photos. This is Tony. You met him the night at the diner. He'll be your primary security when you leave the building. This is James, his backup. And this is Sarah, who'll accompany you to any medical appointments or shopping trips. You want me to have bodyguards? Elena stared at the faces on the screen. Like some kind of Mafia wife? Like the mother of my child who needs protection. Marco's voice was firm but patient. Elena, we've been over this. You're not safe without security. Not until I've finished restructuring and enough time has passed that people stop seeing you as leverage. This is insane. This is reality. He set down the tablet. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you how things need to be. The flash of his old authority sparked her temper. You don't get to tell me what to do, Marco. When it comes to your safety, yes, I do. He met her glare without flinching. You can hate me for it. You can fight me on it, but the security stays. Non-negotiable. They stared at each other across the table, wills clashing like storm fronts. Then the baby kicked, hard enough that Elena gasped and her hand flew to her belly, and all the fight drained out of both of them. Fine, she said quietly, but I pick which one goes with me where, and if they make me uncomfortable, they get replaced. Deal. Marco's relief was palpable. Thank you. Don't thank me for accepting prison guards. They're not prison guards, Kara. They're the wall between you and people who would hurt you to get to me. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Please try to understand. I can't lose you again. I won't survive it. The raw honesty in his voice broke something loose in her chest. Elena turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. I'm trying, she whispered. I'm trying to understand all of this. But it's hard, Marco. Everything about this is hard. I know. He brought her hand to his lips. But we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do. Is that what we are? Partners? I don't know what else to call us. His smile was crooked, almost vulnerable. Former lovers, current co-parents, future possibilities? How about complicated? Complicated works. He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, his hand settling on her belly with reverent care. But some complications are worth it. The baby kicked against his palm, and Elena watched wonder transform his face. This was the real Marco, she realized. Not the crime boss or the strategist or the man who commanded empires, but the father who was discovering his child one kick at a time. Have you thought about names? He asked, his hands moving gently across her stomach. A few, nothing definite. Tell me. So she did, sharing the list she'd been compiling in secret, strong names and soft names, traditional names and unusual ones. Marco listened, adding his own suggestions, and they spent the next hour debating the merits of various options like any normal couple expecting their first child. It was dangerously easy to forget in moments like these that their situation was anything but normal. The illusion shattered 3 days later when Elena woke to shouting from somewhere in the penthouse. She'd never heard Marco raise his voice before, and the sound sent ice through her veins. She found him in his office, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand clenched into a fist on his desk. I don't care what it costs, he was snarling. Find him and deal with it, permanently. A pause. No, not permanently like that. I'm out of that game. Just make sure he understands what happens if he comes near her again. He hung up, and his eyes found Elena in the doorway. The fury in his expression softened immediately to concern. You shouldn't be up. It's 3 a.m. What's wrong? Her hand found her belly protectively. Is someone handled? He crossed to her in 3 strides. Someone got too curious about your location. It's been dealt with. Dealt with how? Do you really want to know? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena realized she was at a crossroads. She could demand the truth and face the reality of what Marco's protection actually meant, or she could accept the comfortable lie and keep living in this bubble of safety and denial. No, she said finally. I don't want to know. Something shifted in Marco's expression. Disappointment maybe, or relief. Then go back to bed, Kara. Everything's fine. But as Elena returned to her room, she knew everything was far from fine. She was living in a gilded cage protected by a man who claimed to be leaving his violent life behind, but who still made people disappear with a phone call. She was falling for him again, had maybe never stopped, and that terrified her more than any external threat ever could. Because loving Marco Valenti meant accepting all of him, the beautiful and the brutal, and Elena wasn't sure she was strong enough for that. Not yet, maybe not ever. The unspoken truth hung between them in the following days like smoke, visible but untouchable, poisoning the air even as they both pretended to breathe normally. Elena moved through the penthouse with increasing restlessness, her body growing heavier as the baby prepared for arrival, her mind churning with questions she wasn't brave enough to ask. Marco watched her with careful eyes, giving her space but never quite leaving her alone. He was always there, in the next room, down the hall, a phone call away. His presence should have felt suffocating, but instead it felt like waiting for a storm that had already begun. 4 weeks after that midnight phone call, Elena stood at the nursery window watching rain streak down the glass. The room was nearly finished, soft grays and whites, a hand-carved crib that probably cost more than her old car, shelves waiting for books and toys. Marco had let her make every decision, from paint colors to the rocking chair in the corner, and somehow that made it worse. He was giving her everything except honesty. It's beautiful, Maria said from the doorway, a stack of impossibly soft blankets in her arms. You've done a wonderful job. Marco did most of it. Elena ran her hand along the crib's railing. I just pointed at things. You chose them. That's what matters. Maria began arranging the blankets in a nearby dresser with practiced efficiency. He wants you to feel like this is your home, dear, your space. It's his cage dressed up as a sanctuary. The words came out harsher than intended, but Maria didn't flinch. She simply continued folding blankets, her movements steady and calm. Is that what you really think? The older woman asked. That he's keeping you prisoner? I don't know what to think anymore. Elena's hand moved to her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. 1 minute he's cooking me dinner and talking about the future like we're a normal couple. The next he's making phone calls in the middle of the night, dealing with threats I'm not supposed to know about. He's protecting you. He's controlling me. Elena turned from the window. There's a difference. Is there? Maria met her gaze evenly. You could leave any time you want. He's made that clear. The door isn't locked, Elena. You're choosing to stay. The truth of that statement hit like a physical blow. Elena had been so focused on feeling trapped that she hadn't acknowledged the obvious. She was here by choice. Complicated, messy, terrifying choice, but choice nonetheless. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be with someone like him. How to raise a child in this world. Then maybe you should tell him that. Maria's smile was gentle. Instead of letting the fear eat you alive from the inside. Before Elena could respond, raised voices erupted from somewhere deeper in the penthouse. Not Marco this time. Other voices, angry and accusatory, cutting through the quiet like broken glass. Maria's expression shifted to alarm. Stay here, she commanded, already moving toward the door. But Elena was 8 months pregnant, not helpless. She followed Maria into the hallway, her heart hammering as the voices grew louder. Don't care what arrangements you've made, a man was shouting. You don't just walk away from the family, Marco. That's not how this works. I'm making it work. Marco's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of calm that preceded violence. The transition is happening whether you like it or not, Sal. Elena reached the living room to find Marco facing down 3 men in expensive suits, his posture deceptively relaxed but radiating menace. Tony and 2 other security guards stood nearby, hands resting casually near weapons Elena tried not to think about. The man who'd been shouting, Sal apparently, was red-faced and furious, his finger jabbing toward Marco like a weapon of its own. You think you can just hand everything to Dante and play house with your pregnant girlfriend? That's not how succession works in this business. It is now. Marco's eyes flicked to Elena, something tightening in his expression when he saw her. And I suggest you lower your voice. You're in my home, and you're upsetting the mother of my child. Sal's gaze swung to Elena, and she fought the urge to step back from the cold assessment in his eyes. So this is her. The reason you're throwing away everything we built. Careful. The single word from Marco carried enough threat to make Sal's companion shift nervously. Very careful how you finish that sentence. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. But Sal did take a step back. You're making yourself weak, Marco. Vulnerable. And in our world, vulnerable men don't last long. In your world, Marco corrected. Not mine, not anymore. You can't just stop being who you are because you knocked up some... Marco moved so fast, Elena almost missed it. One moment he was standing still, the next his hand was wrapped around Sal's throat, slamming the older man against the wall with controlled violence. Finish that sentence, Marco said softly, and I'll remember all the reasons I was very good at my job. The reasons people were terrified of me. Want to test how much I've changed, Sal? Elena's hand flew to her belly as the baby kicked in response to her spiking adrenaline. This was the Marco she'd run from, the one capable of switching from calm to lethal in a heartbeat, the one who commanded fear as easily as breathing. Marco? His name came out steadier than she felt. Let him go. For a long moment, Marco didn't move. His grip stayed firm on Sal's throat, his eyes locked on the other man's face with terrifying focus. Then slowly, he released his hold and stepped back. Get out, he said to all three men. And tell Dante that if he can't keep his subordinates in line, maybe he's not ready for the responsibility I'm giving him. Sal straightened his collar with shaking hands, his face still red but now from humiliation rather than anger. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Marco's voice was final. You just don't know it yet. Tony, show them out. The security team moved with smooth efficiency, ushering the three men toward the elevator. Elena stood frozen, watching the scene unfold like a play she'd stumbled into without knowing her lines. When the elevator doors closed, Marco turned to her. You shouldn't have seen that. But I did. Elena's voice was surprisingly steady. Is this what you meant by handling things? Threatening people who disagree with you? I was defending you. He moved toward her and she instinctively stepped back. The hurt that flashed across his face was quickly masked. Sal was about to insult you. I wasn't going to allow that. So you decided to choke him instead. I didn't hurt him. Marco's jaw clenched. If I'd wanted to hurt him, you'd know the difference. That's supposed to make me feel better? Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm room. Knowing that you could have done worse but showed restraint? Elena. No. She held up a hand. I can't do this right now. I can't pretend that what I just saw was normal or acceptable or anything other than exactly what I was afraid of. I'm protecting what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone made her flinch. Protecting you, protecting our child, that's not going to change just because it makes you uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marco, I'm terrified. Terrified of the violence that follows you like a shadow. Terrified of raising a child in a world where threats and intimidation are just normal business. Terrified that one day our son or daughter is going to watch you hurt someone and think that's how love looks. The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty. Marco looked like she'd struck him, his expression shifting from defensive to devastated in the space of a heartbeat. Is that really what you think? His voice was barely above a whisper. That I would let our child grow up thinking violence is love? I don't know what to think anymore. Exhaustion crashed over Elena like a wave. I just know I can't keep living in this beautiful prison, pretending everything's fine when it's not. Then what do you want from me? Marco's control was fracturing, real emotion bleeding through. I'm restructuring my entire life for you, giving up power, giving up control, trying to be the man you need me to be. What more can I possibly do? Stop lying to me. The words tore out of her. Stop pretending you've left that world behind when you're still making threats and handling problems with violence. Stop asking me to trust you when you won't be honest about what that trust means. I'm trying to protect you by keeping me in the dark? Elena's voice rose. By making decisions about my safety without consulting me? That's not protection, Marco. That's control. The baby kicked hard and Elena gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Immediately Marco was there, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Are you okay? Is it the baby? I'm fine, but her voice shook. I need some air, some space to think. It's late. You shouldn't go out alone. Then I'll take Tony or James or whoever you've assigned to watch me today. The bitterness in her tone made Marco flinch. But I'm going out, Marco, with or without your permission. For a moment she thought he might argue, might use his authority to keep her there. Instead, he stepped back, his expression carefully blank. Take Tony and your phone. His voice was tight. Please. The please broke something in her chest, but Elena was too wrung out to examine what. She just nodded and headed for her room to change, feeling Marco's eyes on her back the entire way. 20 minutes later, she was in the back of a car with Tony driving, the city lights blurring past the window as they headed nowhere in particular. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under streetlights. Where to, Ms. Brooks? Tony asked, his tone professionally neutral. Just drive. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass. I don't care where. I just need to move. They drove in silence through the late evening streets, past restaurants closing for the night and bars just getting started. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the complicated drama playing out in the back of a luxury sedan. Elena's phone buzzed. She ignored it. Buzzed again, still ignored it. On the third buzz, Tony cleared his throat. Mr. Valenti is concerned. Maybe you should tell him I'm fine. But she pulled out her phone anyway, her chest tightening at the messages on the screen. Marco, I'm sorry. Marco, please come home safe. Marco, I love you. 3 simple messages that carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Elena stared at the last one until the words blurred, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She loved him too. That was the problem. Loved him with an intensity that terrified her, that made her want to ignore every red flag and throw herself completely into the dangerous life he offered. But love wasn't enough when the cost was her peace of mind and her child's safety. Take me back, she said quietly. Tony didn't argue, just turned the car around and headed back toward the penthouse. Elena spent the drive composing and deleting responses to Marco's messages, finally settling on something simple. Elena, I'm coming back. We need to talk. His response was immediate. Marco, I'll be waiting. The penthouse was dark, except for a single lamp in the living room where Marco sat, still dressed in his suit from earlier, his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and the naked relief on his face made her chest ache. You came back, he said, as if he doubted she would. I said I would. Elena moved to the chair across from him, lowering herself carefully. We need to have an honest conversation, Marco. No more dancing around things, no more protecting me from uncomfortable truths. Okay. He straightened, his expression guarded. What do you want to know? Everything. She met his eyes. The truth about what you do now, what you've actually changed, what threats we're facing. All of it. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. Then he nodded, something shifting in his posture. A decision made. A line crossed. The restructuring is real, he began. I've transferred operational control of the illegal enterprises to Dante. Gambling, protection, import-export operations that aren't strictly legal, all of it. My role now is purely advisory, and even that's temporary. But you're still involved. For now, yes. The transition has to be gradual or it creates a power vacuum that could get a lot of people killed. He ran a hand through his hair. In 6 months, maybe a year, I'll be completely out. But right now, I'm still the name people respect enough to keep from starting a war. And the threats? The men asking about me? Competitors trying to find leverage? People who think they can use you to force me back into active leadership. His jaw tightened. That's why the security is non-negotiable, Elena. Until enough time passes that you stop being valuable as a target, you need protection. For how long? I don't know. The admission clearly cost him. A year, maybe 2. long enough for the new order to stabilize and for people to accept that Marco Valenti is truly retired. Elena absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. And that phone call the other night? The one where you were yelling at 3 in the morning? Someone found your old apartment, started asking questions about where you'd gone. Marco's expression darkened. I had people convince him that pursuing that line of inquiry would be unhealthy for his future. Convince how? Do you really want details? Yes. Elena's voice was firm. If I'm going to live in this world, I need to know what that means. All of it. Marco studied her for a long moment, then nodded. They broke into his office, left evidence of his own illegal activities where the police would find it, along with a message that worse things would happen if he didn't back off. He's currently facing indictment for fraud, and he's too busy dealing with that to worry about you. So you ruined his life. I protected yours. No apology in his tone. He was working for people who would have killed you to get to me. I chose the option that kept everyone breathing. Elena wanted to be horrified, wanted to reject the cold calculation in his words. But she was 8 months pregnant and exhausted and terrified, and part of her was just grateful he'd handled it. I don't know how to reconcile this, she said quietly. The Marco who cooks me dinner and talks about baby names with the Marco who destroys people's lives with a phone call. They're the same person, Kara. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'm not two different men. I'm one man trying to balance protecting what matters with being the person you need me to be. What if those things are incompatible? Then I choose you. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Every single time I choose you and our child. Even if it means making choices you hate, even if it means you never forgive me, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. The declaration should have felt romantic, but instead it felt like a cage closing. Because Marco's protection came with a price. Her agency, her independence, her ability to make her own choices about risk and safety. I need to be part of these decisions, Elena said finally, not just told after the fact that you've handled things. If we're going to do this, raise a child together, build some kind of life, I need to be a partner, not a possession. Something flickered in Marco's expression. Surprise, maybe, or hope. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying I'm tired of fighting this. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. I'm tired of pretending I don't love you. Tired of acting like I want to be anywhere else but here. But I can't do it your way, Marco. I need compromise. I need honesty. I need to be treated like an equal, not a fragile thing to be protected and managed. You want in. He said it like he was testing the words. You want to know about the threats, the decisions, the risks? I want transparency. I want to understand what we're facing so I can make informed choices about my life and my child's life. She held his gaze. Can you give me that? Can you trust me enough to let me in completely? Marco stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling in front of her the way he had that first night at the diner. His hands settled on her knees, his touch gentle, but his expression serious. I can try, he said. I can't promise I won't still want to protect you from the ugly parts. Can't promise I won't make decisions in the moment to keep you safe without consulting you first. But I can promise to try, to include you, to be honest, to treat you like the strong woman you are instead of something breakable. That's all I'm asking. Elena covered his hands with hers. Just try. They stayed like that for a long moment. The city stretched out beyond the windows and the future uncertain, but no longer quite so terrifying. Then the baby kicked, hard enough that Marco felt it beneath his palm, and he laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Strong, he murmured, his hand spreading wide across her belly. Like the mother. Stubborn, like the father, Elena countered, but she was smiling. Marco rose and pulled her up with him, wrapping her carefully in his arms. She let herself sink into the embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her ear and the solid warmth of him surrounding her. I meant what I said in the text, he whispered against her hair. I love you, Elena. I never stopped. I know. She tilted her head back to meet his eyes. I love you too. Even when I wish I didn't, even when it scares me. We'll figure it out. His lips brushed her forehead. Together. Together, she agreed and let him lead her toward the bedroom they'd been pretending wasn't meant to be shared. They made love slowly, carefully, Marco's hands reverent on her changed body, and his whispered words a litany of devotion and need. Afterward, Elena lay in his arms feeling more settled than she had in months, the baby quiet between them as if sensing the shift in their parents' relationship. She knew the problems weren't solved, that loving Marco still meant accepting a life more complicated and dangerous than she'd ever imagined. But she also knew she was done running, done pretending she could survive without him. They would figure it out. Together. 3 days later, Elena woke to wetness between her thighs and a pain in her belly that made her gasp. For a moment, she thought she'd simply had an accident, embarrassing but not uncommon in late pregnancy. Then another wave of pain hit, stronger than any Braxton Hicks contraction she'd experienced. Marco. Her voice came out thin and scared. Marco, wake up. He was alert instantly, sitting up and reaching for her. What's wrong? Something's happening. Another contraction, harder than the last. The baby, it's too early. I'm only 36 weeks. Marco's hand found her belly, and she saw his expression shift to controlled panic. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know, 2, 3 minutes? Fear clawed at her throat. Marco, something's wrong. The baby's not supposed to come yet. He was already moving, grabbing his phone and barking orders at whoever answered. Get the car ready. Call Dr. Chen and tell her we're on our way to the hospital. Now! Elena tried to stand and nearly collapsed as another contraction hit, this one stealing her breath. Marco caught her, his arms strong and steady, even as she could feel the terror radiating from him. I've got you, he said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. I've got both of you. The rush to the hospital was a blur of pain and panic and Marco's steady presence. He held her hand through every contraction, his other hand on his phone coordinating with security, with the hospital, with Dr. Chen. Elena had never seen him like this. The careful control fractured, real fear bleeding through. It's too early, she kept saying, the words a prayer and a curse. 4 weeks too early. What if something's wrong? Dr. Chen says babies born at 36 weeks usually do fine. But Marco's voice was tight. Just breathe, Kara. We're almost there. The hospital was ready when they arrived, nurses and doctors swarming the moment the car stopped. Marco refused to let go of her hand, following the gurney all the way to the delivery room and only releasing her when the nurses needed to prep her. Dr. Chen appeared calm and professional despite the early hour. Elena, how are you feeling? Scared. Another contraction made her cry out. Is the baby okay? Is something wrong? Let's find out. Dr. Chen performed a quick examination, her expression focused. You're definitely in labor. Looks like this baby decided to come early. But your vitals are good, and I can hear a strong heartbeat. We're going to monitor you both closely. The hours that followed were a haze of pain and exhaustion and Marco's constant presence. He held her hand through every contraction, murmured encouragement when she wanted to give up, and looked more terrified than she'd ever seen him despite his attempts to stay strong. I can't do this, Elena gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. It's too much. I can't. Yes, you can. Marco's grip on her hand was almost painful. You're the strongest person I know. You can do anything. You have to, Dr. Chen added from between Elena's legs. Because ready or not, this baby's coming. I can see the head. Everything after that was instinct and agony and pushing until Elena thought she might break. Then, impossibly, a cry split the air, thin and reedy but strong, the sound of life declaring itself against all odds. It's a boy, Dr. Chen announced, lifting a tiny, squirming bundle. Small, but fighting, just like his parents. Elena barely heard her. All her attention was locked on the impossibly tiny human the nurses were cleaning and assessing, his cries growing stronger as they worked. Marco stood frozen beside her, tears streaming down his face as he stared at their son. He's okay? Elena's voice was raw. Tell me he's okay. He's breathing on his own. Good color, good reflexes. Dr. Chen smiled. Small at just under 5 pounds, which means he'll need to stay in the NICU for observation. But for a baby born 4 weeks early, he's doing remarkably well. A nurse brought the baby over, placing him briefly on Elena's chest. He was so small, so fragile, His tiny features scrunched up and red from crying, but he was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Hi, baby," Elena whispered, her tears falling onto his wrinkled skin. "We've been waiting for you." Marco's hand came to rest on the baby's back, his palm covering most of their son's tiny body. "He's real," he said wonderingly. "He's actually real." Then the nurses took him away, gently but firmly, explaining about the NICU and monitoring and tests that needed to be run. Elena wanted to protest, wanted to keep her son close, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could form the words. When she woke, the room was dim, and Marco sat in a chair beside her bed, his head bowed and his hands clasped like a man in prayer. He looked up when she stirred, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. "Hey," he said softly. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Her voice was hoarse. "The baby?" "Stable. They've got him in an incubator in the NICU." Marco moved to sit on the edge of her bed. "Dr. Chen says he's doing better than expected, but they want to keep him under observation for at least a week. Can I see him?" "Soon. They want you to rest first." His hand found hers. "Elena, I was terrified. When you went into labor early, when they rushed you here, I thought I might lose both of you. But you didn't." She squeezed his hand weakly. "We're okay, both of us. Thanks to you." He lifted her hand to his lips. "You were incredible. So strong." They sat in comfortable silence, both too exhausted and overwhelmed to do more than exist together. Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Everything had changed. Again. And somehow, impossibly, they were still here. Still fighting. Still together. Still hoping that love might be enough after all. 2 hours later, a nurse finally wheeled Elena down to the NICU in a wheelchair, despite her protests that she could walk. Marco stayed close, one hand on her shoulder, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. The exhaustion etched into Froa's face told her he hadn't slept at all. The NICU was a hushed world of beeping monitors and soft lights, tiny humans in clear boxes fighting battles they were too small to understand. Elena's breath caught when the nurse stopped beside an incubator in the corner, where their son lay sleeping under warming lights. He was so small, impossibly, terrifyingly small, with tubes taped to his perfect skin and wires monitoring every breath. But his chest rose and fell steadily, and his tiny fingers curled and uncurled as if grasping for something just out of reach. "Can I touch him?" Elena's voice broke. "Of course." The nurse opened the incubator's side panel, guiding Elena's hand through. "Just be gentle. He needs his rest, but he also needs to know you're here." Elena's fingers brushed her son's hand, and immediately those tiny fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. The simple gesture broke something open in her chest, and tears streamed down her face unchecked. "He knows you," Marco whispered, his own hand joining hers in the incubator. "Look at that grip. He's a fighter." "He has to be." Elena stroked her son's cheek with her thumb, marveling at the softness of his skin. Born early into all this chaos, he doesn't have a choice but to be strong. "He'll never have to fight alone," Marco's voice carried absolute certainty. "We'll make sure of that." They stayed like that until the nurse gently suggested Elena needed rest. The wheelchair ride back to her room felt longer than the journey down, every foot of distance from her baby a physical ache. "What are we going to name him?" Elena asked as Marco helped her back into bed. "We never decided." "I was thinking about that." Marco settled into the chair beside her, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "My grandfather's name was Luca. It means light." Luca. Elena tested the name, rolling it around in her mouth. Luca Valenti. Or Luca Brooks. Or some combination. Marco's expression was carefully neutral. "Whatever you want, Kara." The fact that he was giving her the choice instead of assuming ownership made her chest tighten with emotion. "Luca Brooks Valenti," she said. "Both of us. Equal." Something shifted in Marco's face. Relief and gratitude and love so fierce it took her breath away. Perfect. He's perfect. And his name is perfect. And somehow we made something beautiful despite all the mess. We did. Elena reached for his hand. Against all odds. The days that followed developed a rhythm dictated entirely by Luca's needs. Every 3 hours, Elena pumped milk that the nurses would feed to her son through a tiny tube. Between sessions, she and Marco took turns sitting vigil in the NICU, watching monitors and counting breaths, and willing their baby to grow stronger. Dr. Chen visited regularly with updates that were cautiously optimistic. Luca's lungs were developing well, his weight was stable, and he showed no signs of the complications that sometimes plague premature babies. But he was still so small, still so fragile, and the tubes and wires were constant reminders that he wasn't out of danger yet. Marco transformed in those first few days. The crime boss who commanded empires with cold calculation became a father who sat for hours with his hand in an incubator, talking softly to a baby who couldn't possibly understand but responded anyway with tiny movements and satisfied sighs. "I never knew I could be this terrified," he admitted one night, when they were both too exhausted to sleep but too wired to rest. "Every time a monitor beeps, every time a nurse rushes over, my heart stops. I've faced down armed men without flinching, but this tiny human has me completely undone." Welcome to parenthood. Elena's smile was tired but genuine. "I don't think the fear ever goes away. We just learn to function through it." "How do people do this?" Marco ran his hands through his hair. "How do they survive caring this much about something so vulnerable?" "The same way we're doing it. One breath at a time. One day at a time." She reached across the space between their chairs, and he took her hand immediately. Together. The word had become their anchor, repeated so often it was almost a prayer. Together they would get through this. Together they would bring their son home. Together they would figure out how to be a family. On the 4th day, Elena was finally allowed to hold Luca skin to skin. The nurses helped position him against her chest, his tiny body warm and impossibly light, and she felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was her son, her child, the culmination of every choice she'd made, good and bad, that had led her to this moment. "Hi, baby," she whispered against his downy head. "I'm your mama. And that scary-looking guy who won't stop crying? That's your daddy. We're going to take such good care of you, I promise." Marco was indeed crying, standing beside them with his hand resting gently on Luca's back and tears streaming down his face without shame. "He's so small," he kept saying, "so perfect and so small. He'll grow." Elena tilted her head to look at their son's peaceful face. "And one day we'll look back on this and wonder how he was ever this tiny." "I don't want to forget." Marco's voice was fierce. "Not a single moment of this. Not how scared we were, not how strong he is, not how it feels to see him breathing on his own. We won't forget." Elena shifted carefully, making sure Luca stayed secure against her chest. "This is the story we'll tell him when he's older, about how he decided to come early and scared us half to death, but fought his way into the world anyway." They stayed like that until Luca needed to go back into his incubator for monitoring. Elena handed him over reluctantly, already missing the weight of him against her skin. That night, Tony appeared in Elena's hospital room with a tablet and an apologetic expression. Marco had gone to the penthouse to shower and change, leaving strict instructions that Elena wasn't to be alone for a single moment. "Mr. Valenti asked me to show you this," Tony said, pulling up a video feed, security footage from the hospital entrances. Elena's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because someone tried to get past the front desk asking about you and the baby." Tony's expression was grim. "Security stopped them, but Mr. Valenti wanted you to be aware." The footage showed a man in his 30s, nondescript in jeans and a jacket, arguing with hospital security before being escorted out. Elena didn't recognize him, but the cold calculation in his eyes made her skin crawl. "Who is he?" "We're working on identifying him." Tony put the tablet away. "But Mr. Valenti wanted you to know that we're increasing security. 2 guards on this floor at all times, 1 stationed directly outside the NICU." "This is insane." Elena pressed her hands against her eyes, exhaustion and fear warring inside her. "Our baby is 4 days old and already there are threats." "Which is why we're handling it." Tony's voice was gentle but firm. Nobody gets near you or Luca without going through us first. That's a promise. When Marco returned an hour later, Elena was still staring at the wall, her mind churning with worst-case scenarios she couldn't quite push away. "Tony showed you the footage," Marco said, reading her expression immediately. "You should have told me yourself. You just had a baby, you're exhausted and recovering, and I didn't want to add more stress." He sat on the edge of her bed. "But Tony was right to show you. You said you wanted transparency, and that means the scary parts too." "Who was he?" "We don't know yet, but we will." Marco's jaw tightened. "And when we do, the threat will be neutralized." "How? Does it matter?" "Yes." Elena met his eyes. "It matters to me." We agreed. No more secrets, no more handling things behind my back. "So tell me, how are you going to neutralize this threat?" Marco was quiet for a long moment, his expression warring between the instinct to protect her and the promise he'd made to be honest. "Depends on who sent him," he said finally. "If it's someone from my old life trying to force me back into the game, we'll make it clear that ship has sailed and pursuing it further will have consequences. If it's someone trying to use you and Luca for leverage, we'll eliminate the leverage by making sure they understand you're untouchable. And if they don't take the hint, then we make the consequences real." His eyes were hard. "I won't apologize for that, Elena, not when it comes to protecting our son." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be another way. But she was a mother now, and some primal part of her understood Marco's absolutism in a way she never had before. She would do anything, absolutely anything, to keep Luca safe. "Okay," she said quietly, "but I want updates. Every step, every decision, no more finding out after the fact." "Agreed." Marco pulled out his phone, showed her a message thread. "This is the security team's communication channel. You're added now. You'll see every report, every assessment, every action we take." Elena scrolled through the messages, seeing the careful coordination of Marco's security apparatus. It should have felt invasive, seeing this glimpse into his world. Instead, it felt like trust. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For keeping your promise. For letting me in." She handed back his phone. "I know it's not easy for you." "Nothing about this is easy." But his smile was genuine. "But it's worth it. You're worth it." They were interrupted by a nurse with an update. Luca was doing well enough that they might be able to reduce some of his monitoring in the next day or two. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Over the following days, Luca continued to strengthen. His weight crept upward, his lungs grew more efficient, and gradually the tubes and wires began to come off one by one. Elena spent hours in the NICU, learning to change impossibly tiny diapers and feed him bottles of her pumped milk, marveling at how something so small could consume her entire world. Marco was there for every milestone, his phone constantly in hand coordinating business he refused to explain in detail, but which Elena could now see in the security feeds. Meetings with Dante about the transition, calls with lawyers about restructuring legitimate businesses, messages with security about potential threats that materialized and were handled before Elena even knew they existed. She watched him balance two worlds, the loving father who sang Italian lullabies to their premature son, and the calculating strategist who was systematically dismantling his criminal empire while ensuring nobody tried to fill the vacuum in ways that might endanger his family. "You're staring," Marco said one afternoon, not looking up from Luca, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Just thinking about how different you look now versus a year ago." "Different how?" "Softer. Happier." Elena settled into the chair beside him. "Like you finally found something worth being vulnerable for." "I did." He glanced at her, then back at Luca. "I found two things, actually, and I'm terrified every single day that I'll screw this up somehow." "Join the club." Elena reached over to stroke Luca's cheek. "I think that's just parenthood. Constant low-level terror that we're ruining this perfect little person." "He is perfect, isn't he?" Marco's voice was soft with wonder. "Even with the feeding tube and the monitors, even being born too early and too small. He's absolutely perfect." "He is." Elena leaned her head on Marco's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. We made something really good despite everything. We did. Marco pressed a kiss to her hair. And we're going to keep making good things, starting with getting him strong enough to come home. That goal became their shared obsession. They learned every aspect of Luca's care, asked 1,000 questions of the patient NICU nurses, and counted down the requirements he needed to meet before discharge. 5 pounds. Consistent feeding. Stable temperature regulation. Each milestone was a victory celebrated with tears and exhausted laughter. On day 8, Dr. Chen appeared with news that made Elena's heart soar. If he continues progressing at this rate, we might be able to send you all home in another week, she said, checking Luca's chart. He's doing remarkably well for a 36-weeker. Strong lungs, good weight gain, no complications. You two should be proud. A week? Elena's voice broke. Really? Really, barring any setbacks, which I'm not anticipating. Dr. Chen smiled. Your son is a fighter. He's ready to be with his family. Marco pulled Elena into his arms, and they stood there holding each other while Luca slept peacefully in his incubator, oblivious to the joy and relief radiating from his parents. We're bringing him home, Marco whispered. We're actually bringing our son home. The knowledge transformed everything. Suddenly, the penthouse needed to be finished, supplies purchased, schedules coordinated. Maria took charge with the efficiency of a general, ensuring the nursery was perfect and the entire penthouse baby-proofed to standards that seemed excessive until Elena remembered who she was dealing with. Marco's security team did their own preparations, installing additional cameras and sensors, running background checks on every delivery person and service worker who might have access to the building. The measures felt invasive until Tony showed Elena another attempted intrusion. This time, someone trying to bribe a hospital janitor for information about Luca's discharge date. This is our life now, Elena said to Marco that night, curled against him in the hospital room's uncomfortable chair. Constant vigilance, always looking over our shoulders. For now, his hand moved in soothing circles on her back. It'll get better once the transition is complete and enough time passes. Right now, people still think they can use pressure to bring me back. Once they accept I'm truly out, the threats will decrease. And if they don't, then we adapt. We build a life that's safe and happy despite the complications. He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. I won't let fear steal our joy, Elena. We fought too hard for this. She believed him. Against all logic and evidence, she believed that Marco would find a way to give them the life they deserved. 3 days before Luca's projected discharge, everything went wrong. Elena was in the NICU for Luca's afternoon feeding when alarms started blaring. Not from Luca's isolette, from the hallway outside. Security alarms, the kind that meant lockdown and danger. Immediately, Tony was there, pulling her away from Luca despite her protests. We need to move you now, he said, his weapon drawn. James, stay with the baby. Nobody gets near him. What's happening? Elena tried to see past Tony's shoulder. Where's Marco? On his way. Just stay with me and stay quiet. They moved through back hallways Elena didn't know existed, Tony communicating tersely into his earpiece while keeping her close. Her mind was screaming at her to go back for Luca, but Tony's grip was implacable and the fear in his eyes told her this was serious. They reached a secure room, some kind of emergency safe space, and Tony pushed her inside just as Marco burst through another door, his expression thunderous. What the hell happened? He demanded. Armed intrusion. 3 men tried to breach the NICU. Tony's jaw was tight. Security stopped them at the elevator, but it was close. Too close. Marco's face went white. Where are they now? Police custody. But Marco, they were serious, military-grade weapons, coordinated approach. This wasn't some opportunistic grab. This was planned. Elena's legs gave out, and Marco caught her before she hit the floor. Luca, she gasped. Is he? He's safe. James has him, and the NICU is in full lockdown. Marco's hands framed her face. Elena, look at me. Our son is safe. They tried to take him. The reality crashed over her in waves. They tried to take our baby. And they failed. Marco's voice was steel-wrapped in fury. And they're going to regret ever making the attempt. Tony cleared his throat. Marco, we need to make decisions. The hospital isn't secure enough. Not anymore. I know. Marco's jaw clenched. How fast can we move Luca? Dr. Chen says he's stable enough for transport if it's necessary. Tony pulled up his phone. We can have him at the penthouse with full medical support within an hour. Do it. The decision was instantaneous. And Tony, find out who sent them. I want names, I want organizations, and I want them dealt with, permanently. Elena should have been horrified by the cold calculation in Marco's voice. Instead, she felt only fierce agreement. They'd tried to take her son, tried to hurt the tiny human she'd carried for 8 months and watched fight for every breath. Whoever they were, they deserved whatever Marco did to them. The move happened with military precision. An ambulance, 3 security vehicles, and a medical team that transferred Luca from the NICU to the penthouse's prepared nursery in under 90 minutes. Elena rode with her son, watching monitors and holding her breath every time the ambulance hit a bump. Marco followed in a separate car, his phone to his ear the entire time, and Elena could hear the fury in his voice even through the ambulance walls when he barked orders at whoever was on the other end. The penthouse had been transformed. The nursery now had hospital-grade monitoring equipment, a nurse's station in the corner, and enough medical supplies to run a small clinic. Dr. Chen was already there, having arrived ahead of them to ensure everything was ready. He's doing fine, she assured Elena as they settled Luca into his new crib, larger than the NICU isolette but still surrounded by monitors and warmth. His vitals are stable. The transport went perfectly. He doesn't even know he moved. Thank you. Elena couldn't take her eyes off Luca, counting his breaths like a prayer. For everything. Just doing my job. But Dr. Chen's smile was warm. I'll be checking in daily until he's completely stable. You have my number if anything concerns you, and the nurse, Sarah, will be here around the clock for the next week. When they were finally alone as they could be with a NICU nurse in the corner and security stationed throughout the penthouse, Marco pulled Elena into his arms. I'm sorry, he said against her hair. I thought I'd handled this. Thought I'd secured our safety. I was wrong. You couldn't have known. But Elena was shaking. They were going to take him, Marco, our baby. They were going to, but they didn't. His grip tightened. And they never will. I promise you, Elena. I will burn down this entire city before I let anyone hurt our son. She believed him. Completely. And that should have terrified her, but instead it felt like safety. That night neither of them slept. They took turns sitting vigil beside Luca's crib, watching him sleep peacefully, while the city sprawled beyond the windows. Every hour, the nurse checked his vitals and adjusted monitors, her presence both reassuring and a reminder of how fragile everything was. Around 3 a.m, Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something dark and satisfied crossed his face. We got them, he said quietly. Tony identified all 3 men and traced them back to their employer. Who? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Viktor Kozlov, Russian crime family trying to move into territory I left behind. Marco's expression was hard. He thought grabbing Luca would force me back into the game to negotiate. He thought wrong. What are you going to do? Marco looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes, the instinct to protect her from the truth versus the promise he'd made to be honest. I'm going to make sure he never threatens my family again, he said finally. And I'm going to do it in a way that sends a message to everyone else who might get similar ideas. Marco, I know what you're going to say. He moved to kneel beside her chair. I know this isn't the life you wanted, but it's the life we have. And I need you to trust me to handle the threats while you take care of our son. Can you do that? Elena looked at Luca, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding him. Looked at Marco, this complicated man who was trying so hard to be what they needed. Looked at the life they'd built from wreckage and fear and love that refused to die. Just promise me one thing, she said finally. Anything. Come back to us. Whatever you have to do, however you have to do it, come back. Because Luca needs his father, and I need you. I promise. Marco pressed his forehead to hers. I will always come back to you. He left before dawn, taking Tony and 3 others with him. Elena didn't ask where they were going or what exactly they planned to do. Some things, she was learning, were better left unknown. She spent the day with Luca, feeding him and changing him and marveling at how perfect he was despite the imperfect world he'd been born into. The nurse Sarah showed her techniques for burping and soothing, giving her confidence in handling something so small and precious. Marco returned just after sunset, his clothes different than when he left, his expression carefully neutral. "It's done," was all he said. Elena didn't ask for details, just pulled him into the nursery where Luca was sleeping and let him hold his son while she held both of them. Whatever Marco had done, whoever Viktor Kozlov was now, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were safe, together, and finally, beginning to believe they might actually survive this. The weeks that followed Viktor Kozlov's neutralization brought a peace Elena hadn't dared hope for. News filtered through Marco's security channels that the Russians' operation had collapsed spectacularly, his assets seized and his associates scattering like rats from a sinking ship. Whatever Marco had done, it had been thorough and final. Luca thrived in the safety of the penthouse. His weight climbed steadily past 5 pounds, then 6, his cheeks filling out and his tiny limbs growing stronger. The monitors came off one by one, until finally, 3 weeks after coming home, Dr. Chen pronounced him healthy enough to sleep without constant medical supervision. "He's officially just a regular baby now," she said with a smile, packing up the last of the equipment. "No more NICU protocols, no more nurses around the clock. You two are on your own." The prospect should have been terrifying, but Elena felt only relief. She and Marco had found their rhythm, trading off night feedings, learning Luca's different cries, discovering that he calmed instantly to his father's low voice singing Italian songs that Marco claimed not to remember learning. Sarah, the nurse, stayed 1 more week at Elena's request, teaching them the final skills they'd need. Then she too departed, leaving them truly alone as a family for the first time. "It's quiet," Marco observed that first night without medical staff, Luca asleep in his crib, and the penthouse settled into evening stillness. "Strange how quiet it is without people constantly checking vitals." Good quiet or bad quiet? Elena was curled against him on the couch, exhausted but content. "Good. Definitely good." His arm tightened around her. "Feels like we're finally getting to just be parents instead of patients." They were learning who they were in this new configuration. Marco, who could negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, became completely undone by a diaper blowout. Elena, who'd been terrified of her own inadequacy, discovered a fierce competence in caring for their son. Together, they were fumbling towards something that looked almost like a normal family. Almost, except for the security cameras and the bodyguards and the fact that Marco still disappeared occasionally for meetings he wouldn't fully explain. A month after the hospital incident, Elena finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "What did you do to Kozlov?" Marco looked up from his laptop where he'd been reviewing reports while Luca napped. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes." She settled across from him, her expression serious. "You promised transparency, remember? No more protecting me from uncomfortable truths." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. Then he closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you're worried about. I'm done with that part of my life." Marco's voice was steady. "But I did destroy him. His business, his reputation, his freedom, all of it gone. He's currently awaiting trial on charges that will put him away for 20 years minimum, and his organization has been absorbed by people who understand that my family is completely off limits." "How did you manage all that?" "I still have connections. Lawyers, judges, federal agents who owe me favors from the old days." He didn't look away from her scrutiny. "I used every single one to ensure Kozlov faced consequences through the legal system. Clean hands, permanent results." Elena absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. "And the message you sent to everyone else?" "That Marco Valenti protects what's his with absolute prejudice, but he does it smart now. No bodies, no mysteries, no violent retribution that creates more problems than it solves. Just systematic legal destruction of anyone who threatens my family." His expression was hard. "That message has been received, loudly. So we're safe now? Really safe?" "Safer than we've ever been." Marco reached across the space between them to take her hand. "The transition to Dante is complete. My legitimate businesses are thriving and completely separate from anything illegal. And everyone in the underworld understands that I'm retired and my family is untouchable. It's not perfect, Elena, but it's as close as we can get. She wanted to push for more assurances, more guarantees, but life didn't work that way, and she was learning to accept that safety was relative and love required risk. Okay, she said simply, I trust you. The words clearly meant more to Marco than any declaration of love could. His eyes went bright, and he pulled her into his arms with a desperation that spoke of how much he'd needed to hear them. I won't let you down, he promised against her hair. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me. I know. And she did. Finally, completely, she believed him. Luca woke then, his hungry cry cutting through the moment, and they both laughed at the perfect timing. Some things were more important than declarations and promises, like a 2-month-old who had very strong opinions about feeding schedules. As fall shifted toward winter, their little family found its footing. Luca grew from a fragile preemie into a robust baby with Marco's dark eyes and Elena's smile. He laughed at his father's silly faces and calmed to his mother's soft singing. The nursery that had started as a hospital room transformed into a space filled with toys and books and the comfortable clutter of a well-loved child. Marco's business transformation continued. Elena watched him systematically divest from anything questionable, pouring resources into restaurants and real estate and the security firm that had ironically become completely legitimate. He worked from home more often than not, unwilling to miss moments of Luca's rapid development. He smiled at me today, Marco announced one afternoon, bursting into the kitchen where Elena was attempting to prepare dinner with one hand while holding a fussy baby with the other. A real smile, not just gas. He looked right at me and smiled. He's been smiling for a week, Elena said with amusement. You're just the last one to get one. Doesn't matter. It was perfect. Marco took Luca from her arms, immediately beginning the bouncing walk that was his signature move. Isn't that right, Piccolo? You smiled for your papa and made his entire month. Watching them together, Elena felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was their life. Messy and complicated and built on a foundation of choices both good and questionable, but real and theirs and worth every moment of fear it had taken to get here. That evening, after Luca was asleep and they'd managed to eat something resembling dinner, Marco pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's heart stuttered. Marco, let me say this first. He moved to kneel in front of where she sat on the couch, the box still closed in his hand. I know we've done everything backward. Met wrong, fell in love wrong, got pregnant wrong, built this life in the most chaotic way possible. But Elena, there's nothing wrong about how I feel about you. Marco, please let me finish. His hands were shaking slightly, and the vulnerability in his expression made her throat tight. I've made a lot of mistakes. Hurt you, scared you, given you every reason to walk away. But you stayed. You chose to give me another chance, to trust me with our son, to build something with me despite all the reasons you shouldn't. He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. A simple diamond, elegant and understated. Nothing like the ostentatious displays of wealth she'd half expected. This isn't me trying to claim you or control you or any of the things I know you fear, Marco said quietly. This is me asking if you'll choose me. Not because you're stuck with me or because of Luca, but because you want to. Because you think we can build something good together. Is this a proposal? Elena's voice came out breathless. This is me asking you to marry me, yes, but more than that, it's me asking you to be my partner, my equal. The person I build a life with, not the person I make decisions for. His eyes held hers with absolute honesty. I love you, Elena. I'm completely, irrevocably in love with you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you deserve. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. You're already that man. You've been that man since you showed up at that diner and refused to let me keep running. Is that a yes? That's a yes. She laughed through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to partnership and equality, and building this crazy life together. Marco slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like tears and laughter, and coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, He rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to make you so happy," he promised. "You and Luca both. I swear it." "You already do." Elena cupped his face in her hands. "Every single day, you already do." They made love that night with the gentleness of new parents always listening for their baby's cry, but with an intensity that spoke of how far they'd come. Afterward, curled together in the bed, they'd finally begun sharing fully. Elena traced patterns on Marco's chest and thought about the journey that had brought them here. "What are you thinking?" Marco asked, his fingers combing lazily through her hair. "That a year ago, I was serving coffee in a diner and trying to convince myself I was better off alone." She propped herself up to look at him. "And now I'm engaged to the most complicated, frustrating, wonderful man I've ever met. And we have a son, and somehow this is my life." "Regrets?" "Not a single one." And she meant it. "You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner." His hand settled on her hip, warm and possessive in the way she'd learned to love rather than fear. "That we wasted time being apart when we could have been doing this. We needed that time, both of us." Elena settled back against his chest. "You needed to figure out who you wanted to be. I needed to learn I was strong enough to stand beside you rather than hide from what scared me." Wise words from my future wife. Future wife. Elena tested the words, rolling them around in her mouth. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We have time." Marco's arms tightened around her. "All the time in the world." The wedding planning happened slowly, fitted around Luca's schedule and Marco's ongoing business restructuring. They kept it small, immediate family only, which for Marco meant Maria and Tony and a handful of people from his organization who'd become more family than employees. For Elena, it meant her parents flying in from across the country, nervous but willing to meet the man their daughter had chosen. "He seems very intense," Elena's mother said diplomatically, after the first dinner meeting, which had involved Marco subtly interviewing them while pretending to make small talk. "He is," Elena agreed, Luca asleep against her shoulder. "But he's also loyal and protective and surprisingly gentle when it matters." "And the business he's in?" Her father's tone was carefully neutral. "You're comfortable with all that?" "He's transitioning out of anything questionable," Elena said, which was true enough. "And yes, I'm comfortable. He's building something legitimate, something our son can be proud of." Her parents exchanged a look that said they weren't entirely convinced, but they loved her enough not to push. And watching Marco with Luca, patient and tender and completely devoted, went a long way toward easing their concerns. The ceremony itself happened on a crisp December morning, 3 months after Marco's proposal. They married in the penthouse, surrounded by windows overlooking the city and the small group of people who mattered most. Luca, now 4 months old and thriving, served as the world's youngest and most restless ring-bearer, held by Maria while his parents exchanged vows. "I promise to love you through the chaos," Elena said, her voice steady despite happy tears. "To stand beside you instead of behind you. To trust you with my heart and our son's future. To build a life with you that's honest and real and worth every risk it took to get here. I promise to protect you without controlling you." Marco's voice was rough with emotion. "To include you in every decision that affects our family. To be the father our son deserves and the partner you need. To love you completely, honestly, without reservation, for the rest of my life." When they kissed, sealing promises made and futures claimed, Luca let out a happy squeal that made everyone laugh. It was perfect and messy and absolutely them. The reception was small but joyful. Maria outdoing herself with food, while Luca charmed everyone by being an exceptionally content baby for once. Tony gave a toast that was surprisingly touching, talking about watching Marco transform from a man who trusted no one into a father who'd learned that real strength came from vulnerability. "To the Valentis," he finished, raising his glass. "May your life together be exactly as complicated and beautiful as you deserve." They honeymooned at home, neither willing to travel with Luca so young. Instead, they took a week off from everything. Marco's phone turned off, Elena's stress set aside, and just existed as a family. They cooked together, watched terrible movies, and took turns walking Luca around the penthouse when he was fussy. It was ordinary and domestic and nothing like the glamorous life Elena had once associated with being Marco's, But it was perfect precisely because it was real. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset with Luca between them on the couch, Marco pulled out his phone. "I want to show you something," he said, bringing up a document. "It's been in the works for a while, but I wanted to wait until it was final." Elena scanned the legal paperwork, her eyes widening as she understood what she was reading. This is a trust. For Luca. Not just a trust. His future. Marco scrolled through the pages. Every legitimate asset I own, set up so he inherits when he's 25. But more than that, protections built in so that if anything from my old life ever comes back, it can't touch him. He's completely insulated from any consequences of choices I made before he was born. Marco, this is... Elena couldn't find words big enough. This is everything. This is what he deserves. A clean slate, a legitimate inheritance, and the freedom to choose his own path without being weighed down by his father's past. Marco's expression was serious. I can't change where I came from or everything I did to get here, but I can make sure he starts from a different place. Elena kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. When they broke apart, Luca was watching them with his serious dark eyes, as if he somehow understood the weight of what his parents were building for him. He's going to be amazing, Elena whispered. With you as his father, how could he be anything else? With you as his mother, Marco corrected. I'm just following your lead on this parenting thing. They laughed, and Luca joined in with his own baby giggle, and the moment crystallized into the kind of memory Elena knew she'd carry forever. The months turned into a year, and Luca's first birthday arrived with shocking speed. They threw a small party, just family and close friends, watching their son destroy a cake with gleeful enthusiasm while smearing frosting in his dark curls. He looks like you, Elena said to Marco, wiping chocolate off Luca's face while their son squirmed with impatience. He has your smile. Marco captured it on his phone, adding to the thousands of photos he'd taken over the past year. And your determination. Did you see him trying to climb out of his high chair earlier? Your stubbornness, you mean. But Elena was grinning. He's perfect, absolutely perfect. Like his mother. They'd settled into their roles with surprising ease. Marco had fully transitioned out of his criminal enterprises, now running a security consulting firm that was both legitimate and wildly successful. Dante had taken over the old organization smoothly, and the feared violence of transition had never materialized. Elena had started writing, first a blog about unexpected motherhood, then freelance articles about navigating complicated family dynamics. She'd found her voice again, the one she'd lost somewhere between falling in love with a crime boss and running away scared. They were building something real, something that would last. That night, after Luca was asleep and the remnants of the party cleaned away, they stood together at the nursery door watching their son sleep. Do you ever think about that night at the diner? Marco asked quietly. How different everything would be if I hadn't walked in. All the time. Elena leaned against him. I'd probably still be working there, still struggling, still alone and scared. Luca would have grown up without knowing his father. I'd have spent the rest of my life searching for you. His arm came around her waist. Wondering what I'd lost, unable to move forward because part of me was always missing. But that's not what happened. Elena turned to face him, her hands settling on his chest. You found us, you fought for us, and we built this. We did. Marco kissed her forehead. Against every odd, despite every obstacle, we actually made it work. They stood there for a long moment, watching their son sleep peacefully, before retiring to their own room. These quiet moments had become Elena's favorite, the space between Luca's bedtime and their own, when they could talk and touch and simply exist as Marco and Elena rather than mom and dad. I have something to tell you, Elena said as they settled into bed. Marco's expression immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Actually, everything's right. Very right. I'm pregnant again. For a moment, Marco just stared at her, his hand frozen against her abdomen. Then his face broke into a smile so wide and genuine it took her breath away. Pregnant? Really? Really. About 6 weeks along. Elena bit her lip. I know we didn't exactly plan this, and Luca's still so young, but nothing. Marco pulled her into his arms, careful even in his excitement. This is perfect. You're perfect. We're going to have another baby. You're not upset? We talked about waiting. Plans change. He kissed her deep and thorough and full of promise. Some of the best things in our lives have come from not following the plan. Why stop now? Elena laughed against his mouth, feeling the last of her worry dissolve. 2 under 2. We're going to be exhausted. We're already exhausted. At least this way we'll be exhausted together. Marco's hand splayed across her stomach with reverent care. How are you feeling? Any morning sickness? Do you need anything? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. She covered his hand with hers. I know what to expect this time. And I have you. That makes all the difference. They made love slowly, carefully, Marco treating her like she was made of glass despite her protests that she wasn't fragile. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Elena felt a peace she'd never quite believed possible. This was her life now. Marco's wife, Luca's mother, carrying their second child, and building a future that was messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. I love you, she whispered into the dark. I love you too. Marco's response was immediate and certain. Both of you, all of you, my entire world. The second pregnancy progressed smoothly, a stark contrast to her experience with Luca. Elena's body knew what to do this time, and without the stress of being alone and terrified, she actually enjoyed the experience. Marco was even more protective than before, if that was possible, but he'd learned to balance protection with respect for her autonomy. They learned they were having a daughter, and watching Marco process the news was one of Elena's favorite memories. He'd gone pale, then red, then looked like he might cry. A daughter, he kept repeating. I'm going to have a daughter. You sound terrified, Elena teased. I am terrified, absolutely terrified. But he was smiling. What do I know about raising a girl? The same thing you knew about raising a boy, absolutely nothing, and you figured that out just fine. They named her Sophia, after Marco's grandmother, and she arrived on a warm spring evening exactly 2 weeks before her due date. The delivery was easier than Luca's had been, and Sophia emerged with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward. Luca, now 18 months old and fiercely independent, was initially suspicious of the tiny human who'd invaded his space. But the first time Sophia wrapped her fingers around his, he melted into instant adoration. Gentle, Marco kept reminding him as Luca tried to pet his sister like she was a puppy. Very gentle with Sophia. Baby, Luca announced with great seriousness, patting Sophia's head with exaggerated care. My baby. Our baby, Elena corrected, but she was crying happy tears. You're such a good big brother. Their family expanded to fill the penthouse with noise and chaos and more love than Elena had thought possible. Marco transformed completely, the dangerous man she'd met at the diner now buried under someone who sang lullabies at 2 a.m. and wore spit-up on expensive suits without complaint. Tony and Maria became honorary aunt and uncle, always there to help when things got overwhelming. Elena's parents visited more frequently, her mother's initial concerns about Marco evaporating as she watched him with the children. He's a good father, she admitted one afternoon while they watched Marco build an elaborate block tower with Luca while Sophia slept in his other arm. A good husband. Whatever he used to be, that's not who he is now. No, Elena agreed. Now he's just ours. The years unfolded with the beautiful mundanity of family life. Luca's first day of preschool, where Marco looked more anxious than their son. Sophia's first steps, taking her straight into her father's waiting arms. Birthdays and holidays, and the 1,000 small moments that made up a life well lived. Marco's business continued to thrive, his reputation shifting from feared crime boss to respected security consultant. The threats that had once seemed so constant faded into distant memory, replaced by the ordinary concerns of raising children and building a legitimate legacy. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same spot they'd married, with Luca and Sophia standing between them as they promised again to love and honor and choose each other every day. We made it, Elena said that night, curled against Marco while their children slept down the hall. Through everything, the fear, the danger, the uncertainty, we actually made it. Did you ever doubt we would? Every single day, she admitted. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something from your past to tear this apart. But it didn't. Marco's arms tightened around her. Because I meant what I promised that night at the diner. You're the only thing that matters more than power or control or any of it. You and our children, you're everything. We're ordinary now, Elena mused. Suburban parents with a minivan and arguments about screen time. Nothing like where we started. We're extraordinary, Marco corrected. We survived impossible odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage. There's nothing ordinary about that. He was right, Elena realized. Their story had started with collision and chaos, with fear and flight and the messy complications of loving someone from a different world. But it had become something else entirely, a testament to choice and change and the possibility of redemption. They were proof that people could transform, that love could be strong enough to bridge impossible gaps, that the future didn't have to be defined by the past. Marco Valenti, once the most feared man in the city, now spent his evenings reading bedtime stories and his weekends at playground birthday parties. Elena Brooks, who'd once thought safety meant running away, had learned that true safety came from standing beside someone worth fighting for. Together, they'd created a family forged in chaos but sealed by choice. A family that would never be conventional, that would always carry echoes of where they'd come from, but that was fundamentally, beautifully, peacefully theirs. No regrets? Marco asked, the question he'd asked 100 times over the years. Not a single one, Elena answered, the same response she always gave. You? Only that we can't go back and tell our younger selves that it all works out. He kissed her temple. That the scared woman in the diner and the desperate man searching for her would find their way to this. Maybe they wouldn't believe us. Elena smiled. Maybe we had to live through the fear to appreciate the peace. Maybe. Marco pulled her closer. But I'd do it all again. Every mistake, every terrifying moment, every impossible choice. I'd do it all again if it led me here. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, the happy kind that came from overwhelming gratitude. Me too, every single moment. From down the hall came the sound of Sophia crying, followed immediately by Luca's voice trying to comfort her. They both smiled, recognizing the routine. Your turn, Elena said. Our turn, Marco corrected, pulling her up with him. We do this together, remember? Always together. They walked hand in hand to check on their children, their life stretching out before them full of possibility and promise. What had begun as a collision in a rundown diner at 2 a.m. had become the foundation of everything that mattered, a family built on truth instead of secrets, a love that had survived every test thrown at it, a future that was finally, gloriously, peacefully theirs to write. Together,